Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar, Reframing the Local Planning Process, Tips and Tools to Help Local Planning Departments Weather the COVID Crisis. I'm Melissa Keene, a Program Manager with the Institute for Local Government, and I will be your moderator this afternoon. The COVID crisis has changed the way that local governments do business. From permit processing to general plan and climate action plan updates, local governments are finding innovative ways to deliver these essential services and engage their community. Today's webinar will share some of the pivots that local governments have made in their planning processes to continue to meet the needs of residents, businesses, and developers, and what policies and practices they can put into place to be better prepared for future crisis events. Here's a quick overview of what we're going to cover today. I'm going to share a little bit of information about the Institute for Local Government. Then we're going to hear presentations from the City of West Sacramento, San Luis Obispo County, and PlaceWorks. We will have some time for Q&A, and then I will share everybody's contact information so you can follow up as needed. So all of your lines have been muted for the duration of the webinar, but we welcome you to ask a question at any point. You can do so by typing that into the questions box, which you should see in the right-hand channel of your screen. And as I just mentioned, we will make sure to get to as many of those as possible at the close of this webinar. So a little bit about ILG, in case you aren't familiar with us. We are the nonprofit training and education affiliate of the League of California Cities, the California State Association of Counties, and the California Special Districts Association. We provide practical and easy-to-use resources so local agencies can effectively implement policies on the ground. Here's a high-level overview of our programs and our services. We, again, provide training and education, technical assistance, capacity building, and convening services to local governments statewide. And we focus in four main areas. Our civics education and workforce pillar helps facilitate municipal school partnerships and share information about careers in public service. Our public engagement program provides training and resources to help local governments authentically and consistently engage their communities in a variety of topic areas. Our leadership and governance program provides training and resources on state-mandated requirements, including AB 1234 and harassment prevention, as well as resources to help local agencies operate more effectively, develop leadership skills, and increase public trust. And our Sustainable Communities program provides information on topics ranging from housing, planning and land use, to energy efficiency and greenhouse gas reduction. Here's a high-level overview of some of our free resources that are available to all of you. In response to the COVID crisis, we developed a dedicated webpage there that has local government resources, state and national resources, tools and upcoming training opportunities, and then highlights a number of the innovative ways that your local government colleagues across the state have been responding to this crisis. I wanted to flag a new resource we just developed on sustainability best practices during the COVID crisis. So this is an update to a longstanding document that we've had that covers best practices in areas like energy efficiency, water and wastewater, community engagement, recycling, and a number of other things to help local governments be more sustainable. Late last year, we also released a housing and public engagement toolkit. So I would encourage you to check that out. It helps you have that conversation in your community and engage them around a general plan update or a housing element update or an individual housing project that you're trying to get going in your community. And then related to that, we also have a number of public engagement resources that are free to all of you, ranging from the basics of public engagement and getting started to working with your community-based organizations, providing language access resources and working with ethnic media. And then we also have a whole framework that we call tiers that's available to you all that includes a step-by-step process to help engage and embed public engagement into your operations, has a number of templates that can be customized, and a lot of resources for you there. On the COVID front, just one thing I wanted to flag for you all is that all of our affiliates have also created dedicated web pages for their members. So if you're a member of the League or CSAC or CSGA, we definitely encourage you to check these out as well. Before we jump into the content, we just wanted to get a sense of who is on the line with us today. So we have a few quick polls that we would like for you to respond to. So this first one is just what best describes your agency. Are you with a city, a county, a special district? Are you with a private company or a consulting firm? I'll give you guys just a minute or so to respond to that. So it looks like the majority of the folks on the line are with a city, about 70%. Definitely got a few county folks and some other nonprofits or corporate partners. And then one more quick one on this front. So what best describes your relationship to local government? Are you a staff member? Are you a consultant? Are you an elected official? So again, looks like the majority, vast majority, about 75% are staff. Got about 10%, 9 or 10% elected officials, and then a few others. Well, thank you for indulging us on that front. It's helpful to know who we're talking to. So today's presenters, we have Brandon James and David Tilley from the city of West Sacramento. We have Trevor Keith with San Luis Obispo County, and Lynette Guzman and Mark Teague with PlaceWorks. So first up to kick us off are Brandon and David.
David, are you going to go ahead?
You're first up, Brandon.
Okay, perfect. My name is Brandon James, and I am a building inspector with the city of West Sacramento, and I am here to share a little bit about virtual inspections and how things have changed since the COVID-19 pandemic. Before that, I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself. I've been a building inspector for just under 4 years now. Prior to that, I was a construction supervisor too with California State Parks, and prior to that, I worked in the private sector as a project manager and a project engineer on commercial projects, concrete tilt-up buildings, things of that nature. So been around a little bit, and now I find myself here at the city of West Sacramento, and it's been a great place to be. So now kind of diving into virtual inspections, and it was something that kind of hit us quickly and caught us off guard, but our city quickly went to a blitz inspections software that allows us to use our iPads to do virtual inspections with our community. At first, it was very, very difficult, but it has gotten a lot better. And I'm just going to share a few of the pros and the cons with this inspection platform. So let me move the slide here. Can you move the slide? Yeah, there we go. I am unable to move the slide, David.
Here we go.
Is this the correct slide for you?
No. There we are.
Okay.
So now we have a slide up here, and just with a few bullet points. The pros to virtual inspections that I found are obviously less travel for the building inspectors. We're not on the road. We're not sitting in our car. We're saving our backs a little bit in some cases, and vehicle insurance and liability. I would like to say I'm a good driver, but I know for a fact that some of the guys that I've worked with, they don't like to drive as much, but this keeps them a little bit safer. And so that's a pro for our cities that we work with, as well as our inspectors. Personal safety during this pandemic, we're not going into the homes again, which it is is a pro, but we also have a con with that too. But the pros are that we're not having to be involved in people being sick. I mean, I've been coughed on, I've been, people touch you, things like that. And so it's overall personal safety for our building inspectors. Then we have visual documents for litigatory purposes. And I have found with this software, when I'm conducting inspections, I'm asking pointed questions that, because we're recording this and it is a legal document, I would ask questions about plans, the dates, timestamps, things of that nature, to ensure that if we are in a litigatory setting, that we will be okay as an agency. We also have educational opportunities for our public due to the fact that they don't speak our language. We're there as community service people to educate them on permits they need, and give them the opportunity to communicate with us. And I think that's one of the biggest keys to this is communication. We have the opportunity to talk them through an inspection so that in the future they'll know that they can actually call on us and that we're not bad people and we're here to help them. So it educates our public. And again, that's what we're here to do, is to serve the community. And it also, from a pro standpoint, the volume of inspections can go up once you learn everything there is to know about the software, and we work out all the bugs. Our volume of inspections can go up, so we can do more, and that'll be a great thing for the future to get more things done and be more efficient. Can we move to the next slide? And now we have the cons. In my experience with this virtual connection is the reliability. I have had a few issues with, Wi-Fi interruptions, lost calls, and we do rely on the end user for their equipment. They've got to have a smartphone, either an Android or an iPhone, for these purposes. But as long as the end user has that, typically it's been okay. But I have had some connection, difficulty, but we're going to continue to work out those bugs. There can be communication barriers. I've been in situations where I've had to get someone from the office of a company, or call back and speak to the wife or the daughter or the son of someone that there was a communication barrier. But again, you work those things out, and in the end, usually we can get the inspection done. The other drawback too are the larger projects. When I have a hotel that's going up, I like to be on site, because you could miss things, and I think it's important that we don't completely go virtual. I think we will need to do site visits, and just on a smaller scale, but do site visits so you're not missing things. Inspectors have a keen eye, and when we're walking around projects, it's very important to just kind of get your bearings and understand you may miss something, or something may not be on the plans. And I think that's one of the biggest cons with this. However, it can be worked around. But all in all, I think the human factor in this is communication, and I think that is the biggest key, is being able to communicate. And I think as inspectors, I have found, some inspectors, we go out and we just want to, do our job and not communicate as much as we probably need to. And I think that's going to be, very important moving forward, especially in this virtual age, that we are better communicators. And I think that's part of the education we're going to need moving forward, because we don't know if we're ever going to go back to the way it was before. And if we don't, I think that's going to be key. So if you take anything away, I think, overall communication is key in virtual inspections. And that's it for me.
Right. Thank you, Brandon, and everyone. And thank you all on the audience for being here today. My name is David Tilley. I'm the principal planner at the City of West Sacramento, and I work on a lot of the long-range things that are going on, which have still clearly been impacted by COVID, and all those things, most of those things eventually translate into an inspection for Brandon. So this is an important task, for well. Just by way of background, I have been now working as a professional planner for the last 23 years and change, the vast majority of which have been with the city of West Sacramento, almost 20 years now. So I am been doing this for a little while and thought we had it all under control after all these years, and then COVID comes. So for background of the way of the office, for those who are on the call today, March 16th, around I think around 11 a.m. thereabouts, myself and the other managers in my department were told by our boss that, oh, by the way, starting tomorrow, you're going to be working from home for at least a month, and which is something we are not accustomed to, whatsoever. And now that 1 month has turned into 3 months. And then many of us were doing different things because we had that immediate emergency in front of us. So that has mellowed out a little bit then. So as we getting back into doing more of our regular work, but albeit remotely, I have 3 major things that are going on right now that are all things that require substantial public engagement. And we worked on a lot of those, the game plan for a lot of those things late last year, because after the holidays and into the early New Year's, when I really wanted to roll a lot of that out. Well, fast forward to early March and it's COVID time. So all those plans sort of went out, outreach plans went out the window. But much like with Brandon and construction, keeping all of our efforts moving has been our, mantra through the crisis, to make sure that when we come out of it, we don't lose any ground if we can help it. But you can see on the list here that I'm working on a specific plan update that's in a fairly defined area, in our city, but then a climate action plan, and then probably like most everybody else in my region here in the greater Sacramento region, it's housing element time. And which is, many of us know that as a hard statutory deadline in it. And by virtue of needing to adopt the region's MTP SCS at the time it needed to be done, we lost even 3 months on the housing element deadline. So all of these 3 elements were things we were all going to be engaging on, and we were counting on doing a lot of pop-up type events, going to the farmers market, going to Little League. We had a whole thing set up for Earth Day, and all that was out the window. We were never going to rely on just the traditional community meetings that are frankly not particularly well attended, and certainly usually don't get a good cross section of the community. So all that was out the window, pretty much just like that. So if we'll move on to the next slide, please. So this is, like Brandon said, this has presented a lot of challenges for us, but I also think opportunities. It's hard to reach persons, maybe harder to reach. We can't deny that. Doesn't mean we can't try. And then shifting everything to virtual, there still is a digital divide out there. Believe it or not everybody has a smartphone or a screaming internet connection at home, to where they can, tune into a Zoom meeting or something of that ilk. And clearly people are they might be worried about other things right now than my specific plan update or, the wonky policy stuff that might go into a housing element. And we're also experiencing, perhaps many of us personally, that there's some virtual meeting fatigue out there, since I feel like that's what I do all day long. But the opportunities here with the pandemic is, and specifically related to climate change, there is a relationship there, and it needs to be better understood. Climate change and housing were the 2 biggest things on the front pages of the papers before COVID came along. And here in this region, where the Mayor's Commission on Climate Change, which is Mayor's Pearl, which is West Sacramento's mayor, Mayor Cabalda and Sacramento's mayor, Mayor Steinberg, that entire effort also had to switch, switch to a virtual mode, almost, turn on a dime like the rest of us. But it's an opportunity. And since we are shifting to doing these things more virtually, we are finding that we're actually probably getting more participation than we used to, because if we put out a virtual workshop of 5-10 minutes long, however it is, and maybe some questions to folks, they can actually look at it when it's convenient for them, rather than having to come in at a set time. And I think that's probably the most critical thing out of all of this for anyone doing any type of civic engagement for any process is, one, you need to go to people because they won't come to you, but you also need to do it more on their time than yours. Everybody coming down to City Hall at 6 o'clock on a Tuesday night. I mean, those days, that was even gone pre-COVID. But getting into the COVID and hopefully the post-COVID era, a lot more opportunities will exist out there. And I've heard it anecdotally from many of my consultants and others that work around the state that they're actually getting better participation in many ways by putting out virtual things that people can look at their leisure. Challenge is still letting people know that exists. However, it is a good opportunity, and you can get some quality impact. Input. We can move to the next slide. I think we have one more in there. So this is just some specifics of what we have, how we have pivoted on our work. We were planning to do all the outreach effort on our climate action plan in the early phases to try to take advantage of the nice spring weather and Earth Day and all of that. So that, fortunately, we were able to sort of flip that, and hopefully we'll be able to do more of that in the future. We just sort of flipped it to now doing the inventory work up front, which we can all do, remotely, and just all the number crunching. But since these other efforts have started up since then, we are going to try to piggyback on many of these things. Your climate work, your housing work, and then most everybody else has to do some additional. Housing element is triggering other other elements of your general plans to be looked at and potentially updated. You do have an opportunity here to maybe piggyback some of these efforts. Is one, to try not to overload people, but they're all interrelated. Most folks on the line should know that housing element this time and SB 379 is has triggered some adaptation and resiliency policies. You need to get in your safety elements. Well, that's a perfect opportunity to talk climate work if you are needing to work on your climate action plan presently. And as always, we need to get things in multiple languages, but also going through community channels is often more effective than some of the formal channels. I think it's noted on there. In my particular community, we have a very large Russian-speaking population, and traditionally they have been, challenging, to reach in big numbers. So we have been able to, through various efforts, particularly on COVID, actually go to them in their language via the channels that Russian community relies upon, really, in their day-to-day lives for a lot of information. They're out there. We have also found through this part of the community channels, a lot of the faith-based groups in our community have very good networks also. And we find that, when people are hearing things from some of their community networks that they trust, it makes the more formal messages that they get via the city's Facebook and Twitter and whatnot, that much more palatable, and they feel more comfortable. These are all things that are going on right now. We don't pretend to have all the answers. We have been, we had to quickly pivot on all this stuff, but everyone seems to be well adapted. The virtual workshop concept. We're even going to still do some things old-fashioned way, mailing out postcards, at least for my specific plan, since that's a kind of a defined area, and doing a mailing there is not too onerous or costly, and that primarily would be directing things to the website and other ways that people can communicate and get involved in these efforts. But virtual workshops, short and sweet, and then engaging folks through that, but also then allowing them to answer questions, take polls, things like that that help engage them more than just listening to me or one of my other staff talk about all the wonderful things we're doing on historic preservation in our Washington neighborhood. We really want to give people to chance to think about these things and put some of their efforts in. I fully expect these matters we will continue to employ many of these techniques, even if in-person gatherings start to become practical again. It's probably not going to happen anytime soon, but I think as we get a positive response from doing these things, I personally believe it's something we ought to continue doing. And it's just amazing how much time by doing these things virtually, it's amazing how much time we actually save by not traveling and not trying to book rooms and all that other stuff just to get not the best turnout in the world. So I think I want to finish my remarks hopefully on a more positive note, despite what's going on around us, that we can learn some good lessons from this and develop some better techniques that hopefully we can all use in our communities. So I think I'll close my remarks on that one, and then we'll turn it over to our next presenter.
Thank you, Brandon and David. Just a quick note on the community engagement side of things. You're going to hear a little bit more about that later in this presentation. But in addition to that, we at ILG are also working to pull together another training session on some best practices and tips on how to do that community engagement and public engagement in this kind of new virtual world, and what we can take with us even as we transition back into opening things up. So stay tuned for that if that's of interest to you. Just another quick note that you guys can all ask questions at any point in time in case you missed the announcement at the beginning by typing that into the questions box on the right-hand channel of your screen. And then we'll get to most of those towards the end. We did get one that came in that's directly related to, Brandon, your presentation. We had a question about what software you're using for the virtual inspection.
Blitz software.
Yes.
We can probably put that up on the later on, but it's Blitz inspection software. Okay.
Yeah, we can share a link with that either through the chat box in a little bit, or we can send it out with the information after the webinar. But just wanted to get to that clarifying question before we moved on.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So with that, I will turn it over to Trevor Keith with the County of San Luis Obispo.
Thank you. So I've been the planning and building director for coming on almost 2 years. Previously to that, some background. I've had various roles in the planning and building department, and then I spent a couple years in the administrative office working under the assistant CAO over there. And then subsequent to coming into government work, I did many years on the consulting side, permits, specific plans, EIRs, habitat conservation plans throughout the state of California, working for municipalities via consultant. So just a little context to the background of where I come from and what I've been up to. So the next slide. So I think you heard, you know, prior to the shelter at home, we prided ourselves for in-person contact coming into our front counter. You know, a lot of, you know, high touch interaction. And I think, you know, that was good. You know, a lot of customer service that way. Our hearings, like a lot of the folks out there, were in person, you know, lining up for your 3 minutes. County, different than the city, ours is during the day. But the flip side is, you know, a lot of people are working, so it's tough to get the hearings during the day. So I'll get to that in a little bit. Next slide. So we did. It was a quick flip as COVID kind of increased. We had our counter open, and I think on a Monday we were feeling some concern. Tuesday it was a half day, and Wednesday we didn't open at all. We were already in the process of getting our non-front counter folks up and running remotely. So trying to get them the equipment that they needed to work from home. But I'm sure a lot of you, bedroom, kitchens, living rooms, trying to work it out if you have a family of where you can work from home. So trying to help our staff kind of get up and running that way. So we have a little over 100 folks that are working from home. We still have kind of a small core group that comes into the office most days, but our public counters are closed. So we had to flip to a total virtual kind of engagement there. And, the uptick of phone and emails, of course, by closing the front counters was a change because, again, we weren't used to that kind of flow coming in. Again, it was more the in-person that we then had to shift to. So go ahead to the next one, please. So I think, as Brandon already mentioned on the inspection side, but I'll just say for everything, it is clear and constant communication with our staff and our applicants and the public to describe, again, it's kind of been an evolution of, how we offer our services. And then it's the balancing act, though, on our staff side of trying to, provide updates of where we are, what the county as a whole is up to. Again, our evolving services to get to our customer base, but not sending out, 10 all staff, emails to everybody and having people just jumble around. Because again, emails on the uptick with our customer base, so trying to streamline that. And early on, I think we tried to meet with managers every morning just to kind of crisis management this thing, make sure staff was up and running, had what they needed to do their job. And again, trying to get to our customer base to make sure that they knew that the permits that were in were still being processed, kind of recalibrate expectations on some of the larger projects, kind of looking at scoping meetings, more virtual than in person. So just trying to find that balance with the communication, though, not to overload, but definitely make sure everybody can be on the same page. Next slide, please. So with our permit tracking system, we had spent a long time getting it up and running. And so pre-COVID, it was really on, kind of the simple e-permits, as we're calling them, hot water heaters, up to kind of solar permits. That was kind of as far as we did. So more of the simple process. And so looking at that and the tracking system, how it would come in electronically, who it would go to, how we track all that internally and kind of externally focused. So we really had to recalibrate that and take a look at how to leverage the software system more for permitting, understanding that if our doors are closed, we can get permits through the mail. Processing times are going to come to, a much more grinding halt because as stuff comes in, applications, you've got to quarantine them, then we look at them, process it through, but then getting it back. So it's a much more time-intensive, high-touch situation as far as staff time, as well as applicants waiting for their permits. So next one. So I think with hearings, it was the same type of thing, taking a break, having to postpone a few till we kind of got a process in place. So I think we're up and running. I think our challenges are, again, things that I'm sure everybody has seen. It's, a lot of broadband access. We've got 7 cities in our county, but the rural area, it's broad, and there are challenges with broadband access. And so it's trying to make sure that folks have that access, how best to reach them. So we've switched to a call-in feature as well. So you can call in, or you can do it via, our platform. We're using Zoom, not to promote that, I think, with any platform that folks are using. But I think our big takeaway really is, just practice, practice, and then more practice. As people get more familiar with the software, get more familiar with interacting, I feel like our planning department hearings, our planning commission hearings, subdivision review board, everybody's getting a much higher comfort level. So again, I think as David said, we're hoping to see maybe some of this, post-COVID era of the virtual setting. So folks don't have to drive in to the city of SLO where our hearings are. It's just much more efficient virtually. So we'll see what continues on past the COVID era. Next slide. So with staff working remotely, we did a survey early on with them just to make sure, how they were feeling, thoughts about coming back into the office, their concerns. And we really kind of got a lot of positive results as well regarding working from home. I think lack of distractions. There's typically not the water cooler in your house, a little less social that way. And I think they found just some greater efficiency in it, not having to get up, get prepared, and get out the door and drive into work. Finding the efficiencies of it all. So I think from our staff perspective, most of it, there's a lot of positive that we're trying to capture those best practices. Again, post-COVID era to keep those going. But again, understand that in-person is very critical as well on a lot of it. So again, as we start reopening, finding that balance in the office. Next slide. So kind of on the lessons learned, we're trying to find more ways for the customers to do self-service. So I think with our online permitting system, it took us about a month to get up and running to be able to take in any building permit or any land use permit. And so I think we're trying to figure out now on our website to really streamline that so it's much more of a user-friendly interface for the customer. So a lot more questions hopefully can be answered that way and have a much more streamlined kind of interaction with our front counter staff to the customer in a virtual way. So they're not waiting, days and weeks to get a response on questions. I think, leveraging the technology that we have, whether it's, again, Microsoft Teams, the platform we're on today, just finding ways to collaborate virtually. I think, we've kind of turned that corner and it's been really healthy for us. And again, improved communication for better engagement. I agree, pre-COVID, it was really hard to get a lot of folks in a room for a scoping meeting. We've seen an uptick engagement level for hearings. And so on to scopings, I think that will be good, hopefully moving that into the future. And again, as I said before, just, kind of finding the balance of how to communicate with staff to keep them updated of what's going on, because you do feel, isolated when you're not coming into the office. So we're looking at, again, finding the balance of how to keep staff engaged so they know what's going on. They feel part of the team still when you're working remotely. And so moving forward, we're in the process right now of revamping our website, trying to find, again, kind of the top 10 things that are requested and just having those up front. So it's very easy for folks to come in and get those. We're looking at how to manage our customer inquiries and requests so we can get to them in a timely manner and kind of break up how we engage on each of those requests. We're right now working with the software provider for our permit tracking system to really kind of build out the rest of the features in a more expedited way. So that will be helpful to staff as well as the public. And again, continuing to offer opportunities for kind of that equitable public participation, making sure that we're getting the word out when there is a meeting, how to use, the platform to get in on the hearings. So again, trying to find ways to increase our outreach on things so they know we're still there and how to reach us.
All right, thank you so much, Trevor. We have one clarifying question for you before we move on. We have a question about what software you're using for your permit tracking system.
So we're on, it's Tyler Technology, it's the Energo platform.
Okay. We will also send that out via chat when we can find that link for you all as well. So thank you, Trevor. Just another quick note to please go ahead and continue to enter your questions into the questions box, and we will get to those after our final presentation. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Lynette Guzman and Mark Teague with PlaceWorks. I'm going to give them control of the PowerPoint 1 second.
All right, sure you can all see my PowerPoint. My name is Lynette Guzman. I'll be presenting with Mark Teague. I am a project planner at PlaceWorks, and we'll be talking about planning beyond traditional outreach. I'll go ahead and talk about a little bit about what it means to do meaningful community engagement, and then Mark will take it away with some tips and tricks for online engagement. All right. So how can urban planners do meaningful community engagement? Just to give you a little bit of background, before I became an urban planner, I was actually a paid community organizer. I worked on advocacy campaigns to promote safer transportation systems for people who bike, walk, and take transit out of necessity. This experience really helped me understand how to do meaningful community engagement, and I want to share a little bit about what I learned. So a few years ago, when I was an organizer, my city's planning department reached out to local organizers to introduce us to a new street widening project. And the city wanted our coalition to support this project because it aimed to do a few good things. It was going to help reduce traffic congestion as well as increase multimodal connectivity. This was great because I was excited to see that they had planned new protected bike lanes. But when we looked a little bit closer at the plans, we realized that those bike lanes would be constructed at the expense of displacing over a dozen homes in an already low-income Latino community. And I was really, really conflicted about this. The city's solution did not consider the impact of new bicycle lanes they didn't consider the impact that it would have on already vulnerable community. When we ended up going out and speaking to some of the residents face to face, a lot of them had no idea what was really going on. Maybe they had received a letter in the mail, maybe they hadn't. It was really through this experience and learning about it that I realized what an urban planner could be doing to go beyond traditional outreach. True community engagement goes beyond sending information, but meeting residents with face-to-face to gather valuable perspectives that otherwise would have been missed. Urban planners could be and should be challenging systems that don't work anymore and create new systems that could benefit anybody. So for me, urban planning is a tool to preserve cultures and empower underrepresented residents to remain, reclaim, and thrive in their own communities. But the question becomes, where do we even begin? Where do we start? As a planner, what is the first step? So how do you, I think one of the most important first steps is investing in community partnerships. I think there's a difference between community outreach and community engagement. Community engagement includes a long-lasting and effective partnership. So how do you invest in community partnerships without spending a dime? Because it's important to note that post-COVID planning is going to be faced with less budget and resources. So some of these steps I'm going to outline don't require really any additional funding. It's stuff that we probably should have been doing in the first place. Building bridges is good, but building trust is essential. Relationships do not occur overnight. We have to get out of the office, attend community events, of course, when it's happening and when it's safe to do so. Go out and attend community events so that residents and organizations get to know you. They recognize your face. They come up and give you a high five, of course, when it's safe again. It's through this ongoing dialogue that connections sort of get built. And building trust with the community is really the first step. So keep in mind that no one ever asks somebody for help if they don't trust you. The second is learn how to be a teacher and learn how to be a student. Provide educational resources for the community to learn about complex planning issues and potential solutions. Also be willing to learn about the community's own work and strategies to address those very complex issues. Do your strategies align? Are they similar or how are they different? And where can you find those opportunities to collaborate? Another great idea is to invite community members to speak at conferences or panels that you've been invited to that you may not be the expert in, but the community might have another perspective to be able to educate others. So give them a chance and the opportunity to teach you and other people. Lastly, be comfortable with uncertainty and controversy. For community engagement, you even need the discussion, the questions, and even the disagreement. Because this means that learning and growth is happening. I've noticed that the most unsuccessful engagement efforts are met with a room full of quiet, non-responsive, or non-participatory people. You either have lost them completely, they don't understand you at all, or they disagree with you so much they've completely shut you out. So it's much more easy to engage people when they're responding to you than when you are silent. And finally, when you get the opportunity to develop an outreach plan with your team, keep in mind a few tips that can help you develop an effective plan. Flexibility, adaptability, and creativity. Outreach is usually expensive and time-consuming. Planners need to be flexible, adaptable, and creative when they're connecting historically marginalized community members to our current planning efforts. Planners cannot always finalize plans or projects on their own timeline. This is important to really understand and really to accept. We have to be flexible with our time and with our budget. Usually, community outreach is always the first item that gets cut from our budgets. What this means usually is that there's no more budget for translation services, childcare, or other amazing strategies that can welcome new residents. Second, prioritize equitable planning. Residents vary, and so does their preferred platform of engagement. For example, some residents may want to voice their opinion verbally or through a survey. Some residents may want to just help collect surveys. Some residents may want to design the survey, and some may want to coordinate the entire outreach strategy. So you need to be able to offer these different levels of community engagement and be willing to educate them throughout the entire process while also incorporating their feedback. Sometimes solving one issue may create another social or political issue. So the outreach plan needs to address unintended consequences. Do any of your planning programs or policies promote unintended consequences? If so, what are you going to do about it before it's too late, and how are you addressing it? Also keep in mind that access is not equal. Not everyone is going to have high-speed internet. Not everyone is going to have the latest technology or even an iPhone. And in fact, many people, especially in my community, do not even have a computer. And folks who may be calling in probably, run into some other troubles, like they can't see the agenda presentation or they can't see the PowerPoint, or like me, I'm sorry you all can't see me, but I promise you I'm real. I just couldn't get my webcam set up. Agency websites sometimes, they could be confusing on how to participate if somebody's trying to navigate online, trying to figure out how to get to the website and what to click. So it could be confusing for a lot of different people, but it's a good idea to have someone assigned to help once it's safe to do so. And I'll give it away to Mark.
Mark, I think you're muted.
Yet another feature of online meetings that we all have to contend with. My name is Mark Teague. I am an associate principal with PlaceWorks. I work throughout the state. I attend probably between 2 and 4 meetings a week with planning commissions, councils, various boards, and so forth. And I, for one, am delighted that I no longer have to spend most of my life in airports and on airplanes or in the car. But I realize that that's a small benefit for all the history that we have here. I'm going to talk with you a little bit about how we go about public notice and why it probably isn't effective. And I don't know how many of you read a paper every day. I read a paper every day, but I have a lot of gray hair and I grew up doing that. As you can see on this graphic, most people don't. And in fact, next slide, please. We tend to put notices in papers that nobody is reading. The readership by ethnicity has dropped precipitously since 1999 even, when they started keeping records. And I just have this through 2015. It's even worse now. Most people simply don't read a paper, yet that is one of the primary methods that the government code requires us to notify of notices. And it's expensive to put a notice in the paper. So we're not only spending a great deal of money, nobody's reading it, which is bad, which may be why in many of our meetings, we have more staff at the meeting than we have participants. It's not the best or ideal. Next. So I work with a couple of agencies that have a couple of council members that are delighted with social media, believe it's kind of a fad. Now that may be because they started a decade ago with a program that's no longer around. Many of us have learned that Facebook started out for youngsters and now really caters to the middle age. What isn't obvious to everybody is many of the people that started are now middle-aged, but we won't go there. It's important to realize that it's here to stay and that you need to have a presence. The internet can be both powerful and wrong, and agencies need to be a source for facts, and it needs to be a trusted source for information. And next slide, please. Oh, I thought we had a different slide in there. So one of the things that's an issue is often a city's website is almost an afterthought. And going into the COVID crisis, we would go there and you might be able to find agency information. You may be able to find who's doing what. And this, of course, varies by agency. But oftentimes finding what goes on at a city was difficult. This hasn't really done much to improve that. We've added a bunch of tabs in some cases or links to video calls and others. But honestly, it can be very difficult to navigate. And you have an overworked IT department of 1 or 2 people, most likely, that's trying to keep everybody's computers working. There hasn't been a lot of attention paid to the interface. Since this is now the primary method by which your city or county is visited, you might want to pay some attention to that. This isn't going away. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a little bit. So public outreach in this era has to step up a little bit. We need to start a little earlier in the process, even if you don't have all of the project information. We have to be open to informal off-site meetings. In some cases, we can run separate Zoom meetings or go-to meetings or whatnot to deal with certain constituencies because you're not paying for people to drive all over or to attend a meeting with very little attendance. One of the things that is frustrating as a planner is we often meet to decide, not meet to learn. The public hearings are held at the very end of the process, where it is almost impossible to change a project in any meaningful way other than to deny it. We don't enter the process very early, and I contend we do this because of the number of attorneys that get involved and really screw with the planning process throughout every step. But honestly, it would be better if we could sit in with the folks and plan the project with them and with the developer, and then all of us go to the meeting and talk about what we did and what worked and what didn't. It's important to ask questions and to listen. Lynette talked a little bit about the need to ensure that you are having a conversation, not just sitting there stone-faced. I've been to so many hearings where people are passionate about their community. And if you're not passionate about where you live, I propose you're living in the wrong spot. So people are passionate, they're explaining why they're passionate, and all they get are a bunch of stoic Mount Rushmore-like approaches from the people they're talking to. That just doesn't work. That's not active listening. Ask questions, poke back, and make sure that all of that is reasonable and of course very kind. But honestly, it's your opportunity to interact with people who took their time to be part of your meeting. Fairness and not speed is the intent of our planning process. We need to treat everything equally. And too often, what we're trying to do is get things through the process as fast as possible. And I get it, probably more than most. Time is money to a consultant. We don't want to spend a lot of time just talking about things. We want to have action. There are ways of doing this, but honestly, we really need to be fair and make sure everybody has a seat at the table. One of the things that always surprises people is when, as a city planner, when I wear the hat of a staff planner, I spend as much time helping people oppose a project as I do helping the applicant get through the system. Because my job as a planner is to help both the residents and the applicant. And that's always a shock. Are you opposed to my project? No, I'm working for the residents to help them understand and to help them converse with their government. And lastly, on this slide, yes, all of this can be done online. And in fact, we've had much more participation online with some of these meetings because people don't have to find childcare to come to a meeting. They don't have to get up from a long day's work, finish their dinner, and come talk to us and listen to one of us drone on and on before they can participate. So we're starting to get a lot more participation online. Next slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about my observations with meetings up and down the state for the last 90 days. Online meetings are awesome. I don't have to travel. People are concise. It works. However, it lacks all of the social community type of communication that we are used to at a meeting. There's no body language. And I can tell you from having taught for a number of years and from having attended a lot of meetings, I can look at a room and tell immediately whether I'm connecting with these people or whether I'm off in left field and they're no longer paying attention. It is much, much harder to participate in an online meeting. Don't fool yourself. It's not just calling in. There are lots of logistical and technological issues. And it's really complicated when you're having to deal with a council meeting and having to submit comments, and it's confusing. People simply don't know how to do this, or each city and county is different. And so each software approach is different, and it can be very, very confusing. The presentations take on a much more powerful role. I have attended so many meetings where the presentation was basically illegible. It may have been designed fine for a high-def TV in the council chambers, but honestly, online, it was useless. I couldn't see the graphics. I couldn't read the text. It was too small, and the person giving the presentation hadn't spent much time with it because they're used to just having a conversation with the decider. So I contend that you need to spend a little more time with the presentations. And as evidenced by our own presentation here today, technical glitches happen. Now, fortunately, whenever this has happened on a meeting that I've attended, it's been met with a great deal of grace and good humor by whoever's running the meeting, a little bit of panic on the staff who's trying really hard to make everything go well, and good nature even on the person on the phone or on the Zoom call or what have you that is being inconvenienced by that. We stop the clock so their 3 minutes don't count, those sorts of things. And usually some good-natured bantering goes around with that. So glitches happen, plan for them, and just have a good sense of humor. Next. So here are some pet peeves, and this actually, a lot of this happened before COVID, but have gotten worse. Presentations being too fast. So many people talk fast it is really difficult to look at something on the screen, digest what you're seeing, and hear what the person is saying at the same time. Just think that through for a second. You flash up a site plan that is god-awful small with a whole bunch of text. It's something that was ripped out of the PDF that was submitted to the application. You're now putting it on a screen that may be somebody's phone rather than a great big monitor like I'm fortunate. And the information is too small. Meanwhile, there's a planner prattling on important stuff that you may need to know. I have read and talked to a couple of planners that have actually done their presentation in Zoom, recorded it, and posted it before the meeting. Now think about that for a second. Just like your staff report, which can be hundreds of pages of illegible text, you could actually do your entire presentation, post it, people could then see it before the meeting, maybe even at the time of the agenda, and then they could comment on it then. The council's not going to care if the staff report gets printed before they get, before they see it. It goes out with the agenda. So this could certainly be done a day or two, the day of or a day or two after, in advance of the meeting. Online question asking is difficult. It's hard to get through. Some agencies don't read the question, so nobody really knows what the question was. Often they'll come up with an answer. There's also very little opportunity for kinetic questions. So how many times have you been in a meeting or been just in a conversation where somebody brings up one topic that reminds you of another? Those opportunities are rare in the online environment. And then lastly, on this particular slide, there's very little opportunity for pre and post meeting explanations. At least once a meeting, if not several times a meeting, I'll have a member of the public come up and ask me a question before the presentation that I can easily answer, put their mind at ease, and they may not even comment. That opportunity is lost through the online piece. They had information that they needed, we were able to provide it, and off they went. They were happy with that answer. So be thinking about the possibilities of using this technology to change how it is you provide information to the public. Most people would rather watch a 3 to 5 minute video of you presenting the project that you've practiced and had done well than they would read a 45-page staff report with countless attachments that really only an attorney can understand. Next. So for presenters, speak slower than normal. I know this is really difficult because you often have a lot of material to get through, but if you talk too fast, particularly in an online environment with very little control over technology at the other end, you don't know what they're listening to. I happen to have a microphone and a very well-designed sound system, but this is what I do for a living. Somebody using a phone in a room full of people isn't going to be able to hear you very well. Practice, and if possible, record your presentation. Post it. This is a radical thought. It wasn't mine. This came from another agency, and I thought it was awesome. Shorten and simplify the PowerPoint slide deck. The PowerPoint should not be the staff report on a bunch of slides. That's just silly. And for heaven's sakes, anybody that reads the PowerPoint to you should be shown the door. That's not what PowerPoints are for. And there should be more pictures. Online, obviously, is a graphic environment. We should be using that as maximum as we can, even to the point of requesting additional information from the applicant. One of my pet peeves is I'll read a settings section for an environmental document. Settings sections are awesome. And in reading the settings section, there's not a single picture of the site. How in the world can you describe in words sufficiently the site if you don't have a picture of it? And I contend that you should have those. And now with Google Earth, you don't even have to go. You can do it from Street View. But that's just my pet peeve. Next. So I have to call out Orange County Fire, because Orange County Fire requires that you submit a form, a carbon form that has to be handwritten to them so they can review plans. And this is a requirement for any project in Orange County. That's awesome. So during the COVID crisis, I had to find out when the department was open. I had to task a staff member to go and pick up the form, which then had to be signed out, sent to the applicant, who then had to sign the form, and then we had to have somebody else hand deliver it. This is not the 1880s. This is nonsense and should never have occurred. I don't understand why. There's nothing other than the fact they needed multiple copies of it, and apparently nobody has a copy machine. I would contend that you need to look at your application procedures. Some of the agencies I've dealt with in the last 60 days have just learned now about online payments. I have no idea what they were doing with their own personal lives, but for cities to be that far behind, it's kind of the head scratcher. So when they closed the counter, you couldn't file a building permit because you couldn't pay the building permit fees. And I don't know, many agencies have gotten past that. Another fun one is electronic file transfer. Everybody started to scramble pretty quickly because up until then, and I have one agency that still requires this, you put everything on a CD and handed it to the planner. In some cases, multiple CDs. And unfortunately, I had to explain to the director of this one agency that I haven't bought a computer with a CD in it or a CD player in it in the last 8 years. So could we please start doing them on USB drives? So some of this stuff is pretty basic, but if you're not on the other side of the counter having to do this, you might not recognize that this is kind of a head scratcher to many folks that have to apply through your process. There should be electronic forms. There should be electronic means of paying you, because that's always nice to have. There should be a really good way of doing electronic file transfer. And I actually have 4 agencies I deal with that still fax things. Now, I find this humorous because I don't think I've used a fax machine in almost 20 years. But by golly, they still use the fax machine. My doctor actually still uses a fax machine, which I have no explanation for. Next. So I like to end presentations like this with some obvious facts that apparently get forgotten in the heat of things. And this is really important, particularly since often technicians start the meeting prior to the time so they can iron out glitches. And so I will reiterate for everybody, all microphones are on, always, all the time. If there's a microphone near you, assume that it's on. And now I would add to that, video cameras are always on. During one council meeting in a city that should remain nameless, I learned that one other member of the council was going through a divorce. The 2 other people were going on vacation, but were worried they wouldn't be able to get there because it was overseas. These are all things I don't need to know as a member of the public. I wasn't even on the staff line, I was on the public line. And it's all because they were having what they thought was a sidebar conversation that nobody could hear. And these little microphones, very, very powerful. So please make sure that you believe microphones and video is on. Be sure of your video background. We're all rather fortunate you have some background here. One of the humanizing things of COVID is many of us are now getting to see little slivers of personal life that we would ordinarily have hidden. Make sure it's a piece of your life that you're okay with people knowing about. And that seems obvious, but you'd be surprised what we get to see in the background, particularly with other members of your household wandering around and not knowing you're on a video call. Stay on mute. Ask for comments to be read into the record. It's important that when comments are made, that they be available for everybody to evaluate. It's difficult to see the comments, and I know that people like to put them in the little chat sidebars, but honestly, those are almost as illegible as the staff report on many of the systems that I've been associated with. And lastly, be patient. We're all kind of working through this, and I can tell you with a great deal of happiness that all of the meetings I've been to have had technical glitches, and all of the people dealing with them have been very patient with the commenters as we're all working through this. So I think that's a pretty positive part of this. It's all become more human, and I think that we we're hoping that some of this technology sticks around and that we have invested in our future as opposed to going back to the way it was before. Next.
Yeah, and I'll kind of simply, want to provide this reminder for anybody doing community engagement and community outreach. This famous English proverb that reads, "Tell me and I'll forget. Show me and I may not remember. Involve me and I'll understand." So I just want to challenge you all in the room, or the ones back at home, to not to forget to involve your community members, because I bet you they will understand how the process works once you involve them. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mark and Lynette. We now do have time for Q&A. So we have a couple of questions that have already come in, but if you have any additional questions, again, please type them into the questions box at any point in time, and we will get them read, as many as we can. One quick note before we jump into the questions is that the handout, the full slide deck, is available in the handout section on the right-hand channel of your screen below your Q&A box, so you can access it there. We will also be sending the full slide deck as well as the recording of the webinar out to anybody who registered for this in the next couple of days. So you'll be able to get it both ways, but just a quick note that it's there. So a couple of questions to get us started. Are any of your jurisdictions that you're working with considering taking in-person appointments yet?
I'll jump in on that. For West Sacramento, we have been doing in-person appointments for building permits, but nothing else to date, and there's no time frame for any expansion beyond that.
San Luis Obispo County, we're doing it's virtual appointments right now, and we're evaluating if there's a need to open up kind of appointment only. But right now, virtual seems to be working well.
Work with
Mark, what about any agencies
that are doing?
Sorry, go ahead.
A couple of agencies that are modifying their planning counter to allow in-person meetings, but they will be by appointment, and all the social distancing will be taken care of.
Perfect, thank you. This question is for Lynette, but any of you guys can jump in if you have suggestions. But Lynette, do you have any suggestions, given the digital divide, about how to connect with underrepresented communities during COVID-19? They're wondering, are recorded presentations or webinars in different languages helpful, or other, translated handouts or things like that? Any suggestions on how to reach kind of the broader community?
Yeah, I would say all of the above, everything that was already mentioned in that question. Anything you can think of, you're gonna have to do outreach in a variety of different ways, and it's all effective if it's all used together. So if that's making phone calls, mailing letters, social media, emails, all of it, I think you're gonna have to do different approaches to get everybody, even word of mouth. Folks who may not have access to internet, they're still talking to each other. They're still talking to their friends. They're still on the phone, maybe longer hours. They're still jogging, walking around the neighborhood, stopping to talk to a few neighbors outside. So I would say, don't be shy. Try new things. And from there, you'll see what works best and what could probably be improved.
Can I add to that?
Please.
So with the inspection process, again, this virtual inspection platform, I mentioned earlier that communication is actually key. And I know several inspectors that don't like to call ahead before they show up for an inspection, and you don't know when you're going to be there. But again, making those phone calls and making contact, and again, communication, we've all mentioned it as key. That's what we're going to have to do in this during this period of time is call. All inspectors will be forced to make those phone calls to their clients.
Thank you. And just to quickly add on to that, from an ILG perspective, we have a lot of resources that speak to some of these questions in terms of how to reach broader into your community. A lot of it starts with first, knowing who's in your community. What do those demographics look like? What is the language breakdown? Do you need to be translating materials? What are your age demographics? If you have an older leaning population, perhaps more mailers, or to Mark's point, going the Facebook route as opposed to other social media platforms. But just trying to find that balance based on who's in your community and kind of tailoring that approach. But definitely encourage you to go to our website and look at some of the resources we have on this front as well. I think a lot of the recommendations about just that broad engagement definitely apply in this situation as well, and having that mix of different types of engagement activities that Lynette mentioned, I think is super important too. You're not going to get everybody with one broad approach. So all of that, I think, is great tips. Another question we have, do you all have any thoughts on how we could potentially integrate some of the good things about these online meetings through Zoom or things like that when we move back to reopening with things like the Brown Act, how we're kind of going to marry the two. They're getting a lot of participation via Zoom and the online meetings that we've talked about. So they're just curious if you have any thoughts on how that might be integrated when we start to reopen.
Let everybody jump in, huh? I'm going to talk to the back end of that. I'm not going to speak to the Brown Act. That's a scary part of the world for a lot of people and needs to be attention. But I can tell you from a consultant standpoint, now that people are a little more accepting of video calls, it should widen your ability or widen the net of people that you can hire or consult for information on. Because hitherto you've worried about having to pay someone like me to get on a plane or drive somewhere. Whereas now we can schedule a meeting. I can do most of it just like this. I don't need to kick the dirt in many cases. We can have this conversation, and it would save the agency a great deal of money and also improve the pool of knowledge that they get to draw from. So I'm hoping, and if I was Nirvana, sorry, that's a band. My idea of Nirvana here is not having to attend meetings that I don't often speak at, but I'm available if the council or commission or the board has a question, and I can be available. I can be working in my office on something else. They can ask me. I can pull it up, and there we go. It seems to me like the decision-making process ought to have a value without having to spend a lot of very expensive people sitting around watching you deliberate. And I'm hoping that out of this, we're a lot more comfortable with that particular approach.
And I'd like to add on to that also. Just look back, think back to the pre-COVID days, which feels like a long time ago, even though it really wasn't. How much time did you and your colleagues spend just traveling to a meeting? I don't know how many times I felt like I spent more time traveling to a meeting than the actual meeting itself. I'd much rather, use, Teams or Zoom or any of those things to have the meeting with whomever I need to. And I've even found sometimes those meetings have been more productive. You can put a document up on the screen, you can edit it in real time. Everybody, sees it all at the same time. Everyone gives your thumbs up. There's no then going back to have the meeting after the meeting, or what did we talk about? What did we say we were going to do? It's remarkable how when you take out travel and, things of that ilk, how much time you can actually recover and use to be productive, rather than just, going back and forth. I have to go over to SACOG for meetings periodically. I could spend, in just an hour just traveling back and forth for an hour's, meeting or less. So there's a lot of efficiencies and time to be gained by here. And I agree, as Mark and others have said, as we, all sort of had a crash course in all these, applications over the last, 3 months, a lot of good has come out of it. And, I appreciate seeing people sort of in their own, natural habitat, so to speak, just sort of, ironically, how this virtual work has humanized, I think, a lot of people for me just by virtue of, communicating in this manner.
And for those of you who think it's just, documents like SQL documents or applications, I'm working with more than one agency that's actually doing this with building plans and engineering drawings, where we're sending full-size sheets back and forth. And we're actually drawing on them in various software packages, so that all of that stuff is kept electronically and transmitted back and forth. So it can be done.
Thank you both. Oh, go ahead.
Well, for inspection too, I don't know if there will be a question on this. One of the things that we're working on as well is adding the software capability. We're uploading our plans. So if I'm out on a site, I have all of the documents, approved documents, in time. If there's been a revision, I can actually look at those documents, especially for our commercial projects. It's really important to have those documents because, again, people can change things, move things around, and if we approve them, then next week there's something different there. So having those plans with you in real time is huge, and we are actually still in the process of getting that dialed in. So that's something that is going to be really important later on for us.
Thank you all. So kind of related to the responses you were just giving, do you see any of these practices that you were kind of pushed into putting into place because of this crisis? Do you see a lot of that remaining even as cities and counties begin to reopen? Or do you all see it going back to kind of business as usual from before the pandemic?
This is Trevor. I think, no, I see a lot of the kind of collaboration and kind of the virtual world living on. I think a lot of the pushing the software to getting, something that would typically take, 6 months to roll out, maybe in government, it takes us a month to 2 months to, roll it out and get folks up to speed. So I think there's a lot of value, in allowing folks to, work from home, be engaged that way, virtual meetings. So I see a lot of this. I think just the level of comfort with government and the public, fulfilling Brown Act and that sort of thing needs to continue on.
Could I jump in there, David, and just add a couple things? I think mentioned it earlier from a legal standpoint with the documents being in place as legal documents that can be presented in a court. I don't see us going backwards. If they're available for court representation, then I think we're going to be on this plane for a while.
Yeah, I don't see any of this changing. I see going more to a hybrid. I'm hoping meetings, we can all get together again pretty soon, but I'm also a realist and know that this is the first pandemic that we've had to deal with at this level. This will not be the last. And whatever we set in motion now, we need to keep doing and be able to continue to function. So I'm hopeful that we'll be able to all get together. And I do actually enjoy traveling to meet my clients. But at the end of the day, it is much more efficient. And to Trevor's point, the other day I had 5 attorneys all looking at the same document. And we were all editing that document, well, which means I was typing and they were talking. And it actually worked out well. It probably saved hours and days of time by being able to do that all at once. The biggest challenge was getting everybody on the call at the same time, but honestly, that's always been the challenge. And it's easier to find an hour out of your day than the 3 hours it takes, hour to get there, an hour home. So my 3 cents.
All right, well, perfect. Thank you all for your input on that. We are getting really close to time, so just a couple of quick wrap-up items before we let everybody go. This is how you can keep in touch with ILG. You can find information about our community engagement resources that we talked about, or our resources related to housing and land use. So our social media platforms are there, as well as a link to sign up for our monthly newsletter. And we have one more quick poll, if you guys will indulge us, about what your needs are as we continue to navigate this crisis. So what additional training would be helpful to you all? Is it more webinars or written materials? Anything there? Can you guys see the poll? I'm not seeing any responses. Oh. Okay.
I saw it briefly and then it vanished.
Oh, okay. Yeah, okay, because it does not, don't see any responses. Okay, sorry about that. Well, if you have any thoughts, feel free to type them into the chat box or the questions box, but we were just looking for a little bit of feedback on what types of additional training or resources would be helpful to you all as your cities and counties continue to navigate this crisis and recovery. And with that, I just want to, again, share all of our contact information with you in case you have any questions that we weren't able to get to during today's webinar. If any of our speakers have any closing thoughts, definitely welcome those now, if anybody has anything to share.
No, just thank you for having all of us and for all of you who attended.
I'll echo that.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, with that, then please join me in thanking all of our speakers this afternoon. And again, we will share out the slide deck and the recording in the short term.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you all.